Diet Coke.
Just Crown and Coke.
And we're live.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Ask Me Anything with Veneeth Iyengar. Veneeth is the head of the Louisiana broadband office, ConnectLA, and he's got to have a gumbo joke, gumbo joke in there somewhere. Veneeth, welcome.
Look, happy to be here, Drew, and thanks for your advocacy and passion for all things broadband.
Well, want to make sure we have our screen set up and that we can see one another and hear one another. Obviously, we've got a lot of people in the community. A lot of people will join. A lot of people will join later. But as I told you just beforehand, Veneeth, we've had or will have at least 10 state broadband directors. We've had those from Arkansas, Mississippi, Virginia, Kansas, Indiana, and coming up next month, we've got Jim Stritzinger of South Carolina, Jessica Simmons of Georgia, Eric Frederick of Michigan, and Valerie Bullock of New Jersey. So you're in good company. Of course, as I also said, you know, you're kind of like first in the nation on a lot of these things, right? And so I'm sorry we're only getting to you fifth or sixth here, Veneeth, but tell us a little bit about how you think about running a state broadband office and why it's important to you to be like first. Tell us about some of your firsts, Veneeth.
Well, look, at the end of the day, the cultural ethos that drives our office is always to work with a sense of urgency and to effectively be in a position where we one day work ourselves out of a job. I mean, I think the way you do that is through sheer execution, through sheer process improvement. You know, we have visited 88 towns, cities, and villages in Louisiana. And so
Wow.
We are real time in taking feedback that we hear and then bubbling that up to legislators, the ISPs, to the general community to create policy and action to keep things moving forward. So, you know, we've got this natural shot clock of you've got to commit and spend this money, you know, but folks in rural areas have had a long time thinking about wanting to get internet as quickly and efficiently as possible. And so from our perspective, you know, we're fortunate to be recognized, you know, sort of as a thought leader. We've leaned on other states, some of whom we've mentioned quite a bit, in helping us get to where we are, and we'll just continue to move forward.
Yeah. Well, you know, obviously broadband and state broadband offices have been around. I had a small role in the 1.0 version of this.
Right?
The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and every state had a state broadband office. And then when that program, the BTOP program, came to an end, probably about half of the states kept their offices and half kind of drifted away. But it was like more like 2018, 2019, there was a real recrudescence of state offices, right? And then of course the pandemic hit, and then it was like, oh my gosh, why do we not have a state broadband office, right? And talk a little bit about your experience, right? You tell us about it.
So what was really interesting, look, our broadband story really started in late 2019. So the governor, you know, through an executive order, recognized that we needed to eliminate the digital divide and to do it by 29, right? So he created through an executive order this Broadband for Everyone in Louisiana Commission made up of stakeholders. Before that commission could ever get off the ground, pandemic starts in March. And you had two legislators that came from rural areas decide that, look, we need to have a purposeful office that's designed to coordinate all this federal, state, and local efforts. And so they worked with the governor, created our office, and then we're off and running. But, you know, to your point, you know, broadband, well, as an issue, especially among rural areas pre-pandemic, has always been number one, number two, number three issue. If you talk to rural folks, especially in Louisiana, and said, tell me what your biggest problems were pre-pandemic, it was, I cannot functionally improve my lives. I cannot functionally and professionally improve my capacity to be better because I don't have internet. It's only when we felt that folks that lived in urban communities started to suffer and have the same challenges that you suddenly started to have a very shared view and vision on the broadband challenges.
Interesting.
And I think from our perspective, that's been really helpful because 64 parishes in Louisiana, even in parishes where we are, which is East Baton Rouge Parish, which is where Baton Rouge is, you know, your broadband challenge is going to be less access and it's going to be more affordability and digital skills. So now you suddenly, you have this shared empathy from folks around the state, urban and rural, that say, hey, now I get the challenge that you've been always wanted, that you've been always asking, and how do we work together to move forward? And that's why we've had legislation that hasn't had a single no vote as of now, trying to get this thing done.
So on a political level, I mean, and you kind of implied this, but just be clear, this is not a Republican or a Democratic issue, correct? I mean,
it's a unicorn issue. It's a unicorn issue because you summarily talk to people around the state. You know, you go to areas that voted 80-90% Trump, Republican. You go to places where you voted 80-90% Biden, Democrat, and you in none of the conversations. Okay, and I'm not to sound Pollyannish because I'm from Louisiana, but we have never have had a conversation with someone that has said, well, I don't want that money, or it's like, okay, Veneeth, this is my challenge. How do we work together to solve it?
Right.
And that's been consistent from day zero up until now. And I don't think that behavior is going to change.
Well, I can't let us here, Veneeth. I want to make sure we get the firsts in. Okay, you were the first to receive approval from the Treasury Department's plan to spend $176 million on ARPA dollars. And of course, this went to fund the Gumbo program, granting unserved municipalities broadband opportunities. You were the first to receive the planning grant under the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Infrastructure Investment, or IIJA, as we all know and love it. You are, according to the Wall Street Journal, the first in the country per capita in adoption of the Federal Communications Commission's affordable connectivity program. And, well, it's not first, you're sixth in the National Digital Inclusion Alliance's Digital Equity Index. Any thoughts on these markers, so to speak?
Yeah. Look, I mean, obviously it's a team effort, right? I think what we've learned in Louisiana, and as evidenced by, we've hosted the Vice President Harris, we've hosted the FCC Chairwoman. Last Friday we had spent significant time with Angela Ty Bennett, who runs effectively the Digital Equity Act and the Digital Equity Program for NTIA. I think, and we've hosted folks from NTIA. We had Alan Davidson. We hosted the NGA last summer in New Orleans, and we had a very successful NGA visit in Nevada this past week. I think whenever people come to Louisiana, I think that what they see is the level of engagement that we've had with people, the connectivity with people that we've been able to develop to create relationships that are unique across all sectors. And because this is such an alignment issue, both from the governor's perspective, the legislature, and all the different sectors that are summarily impacted by the lack of broadband, it makes our job easier, right? So whenever we needed something, we could quickly go through a variety of sectors or talk to a variety of people, whether ISPs or otherwise, and say, hey, this is our challenge. Can we quickly work on a solution? And so, obviously I'm going to be selfish and say I've got the best team. You've interviewed a broadband team. You interviewed one of our former colleagues, Mr. Glenn Howie, who's now in Arkansas, right? We have my colleagues, Thomas, who and David, who, regularly are fielding opportunities to advance in their careers, right? And so I think that's a testament to the engine that we've built here in Louisiana.
So I want to come back to this goal, this ambitious goal of 2019. Okay, note the year before the pandemic.
Yeah.
To eliminate the digital divide. And could you just drill into that a little bit?
Yeah.
How will you know that you are successful?
Yeah.
What will be the marks of that?
So, look, the size of the problem is 1.7 million people in Louisiana don't have access to internet, 42% of whom are Black and Latino households, either because it's an access, affordability, literacy, or the skills, affordability, literacy, or device issue, right? Or access issue, affordability. So, on the access, it's a pretty linear argument that you can make, right, in terms of addressing that piece. As of the most recent FCC maps, the address level maps, which are, look, it's a imperfect good start. It's going to only get better over time, right? But based on those maps, nearly 55%
Veneeth, I lost you for a second. Say again. You still there? Connectivity issues. Can you still hear me? You were going great there. Let's let's hope you're still here. Okay, you there again?
Can you hear me? We're good.
I can hear you now, but I lost you for a second. So
Okay.
So say again what you said after the FCC.
And to some of the folks on that, it is ironic, right? Okay. So, you know, balance we would take care of through the bead. So
still a little bit of buffering there, I guess. The commentary is okay. I can hear you again. I can hear you again, Veneeth. Go for it.
Can you, okay. So in a nutshell, look, in terms of measuring results and productivity, right? You know, we feel really good with the federal resources we have to addressing the sizing of that problem, whether it's access or skills. So on the access, we're 60% of the way there. And on everything else, you know, it's going to take a good 5 to 6 years to addressing issues around device and skills.
Right. Okay. We've got a number of great questions from our audience. It is, of course, an Ask Me Anything. So I'm going to go through those. I'll try to get as many as I can, hopefully all of them. I've, of course, got other questions too. So fill in and complement and supplement here. Let's start with this question from Austin Lahoy. I hope I got that right there. Thanks for being here. Gumbo recipients continue planning their build out and executing on those grant dollars. Supply chain and labor pressures are causing build out budgets to increase materially. What is your take on this kind of, you know, ballooning cost, much higher than inflation, core inflation or real inflation? It's like 3 or 4 or 5 times that, right? What is your take on how to think about affordability moving forward in light of these challenges?
Well, so you mentioned really 2 things, right? Workforce and supply chain. So let's focus on the workforce piece. So this is what we're doing on the workforce. We strongly encouraged all of our Gumbo participants and awardees to partner with the community colleges to develop workforce plans. And they all did. The governor then put in $10.3 million to help provide tuition assistance for those that want to pursue a career in the broadband industry. And by the end of September, October of this year, every community college in Louisiana will offer multiple classes around fiber splicing and trenching to help address issues around workforce. Now, that still requires a bit of a long game because you're organically having to build up a workforce. And I think we need close to 5,000 people to construct, maintain, and operate these networks. And so that's something that's really important to us as an office, and it's reflected in the nature of the BEAD NOFO in terms of how we address workforce. Look, on the supply chain, it's going to be a challenge. And, you know, as a strategy, you know, we'll try to be aggressive in trying to pursue some of the manufacturers to set up and locate in Louisiana. That it's going to take some time. You know, in the meantime, you know, the feds have asked, you know, all the states, and there's potential to look at issues around supply chain and BABA, and to maybe potentially ask for waivers, though on a very specific basis. Mm-hmm. But we have to do things here in Louisiana to streamline costs. So we're looking at, you know, how do we streamline and expedite permitting as an issue, right? Anything that's tangential but not necessarily directly related to supply chain costs directly is something that, you know, we're looking at now around workforce, around permitting that can help obviate the cost of some of these network builds.
Okay.
But look, the thing is this, we're not the only state that's having this challenge. And so I know industry is stepping up, but the fearful part is even in a place like Louisiana and in every state, it's not just, yes, we need 5,000 people to build and construct these networks, but every infrastructure project is going to largely pull from the same labor. So, we're going to have to do a student body left and be as aggressive as we can to build up something, sort of build a plane and fly it as well.
Well, the other piece of that question, and it's being asked by others in the community as well, how will ConnectLA work with local service providers to ensure affordability,
Yes.
affordable service for vulnerable populations of these deployed networks while making sure they're good quality networks? How do we, so if we have to kind of drill into both infrastructure and affordability, how do we do both those things at the same time?
So the companies that have agreed, the companies that signed grant agreements to us committed to pricing mechanisms for the duration of the construction, right? Which may take several years, right?
What kind of pricing commitments are being made here?
I mean, it could be anywhere between, $30, $50, $70 for ultra gig speed service. Because I have been very public about one thing. There's really I've been very public about a couple of things. But frankly, it is a busted investment that we make if we address the access issue and then we stop. Because if we don't address the affordability issue, then you're inherently doing a disservice to the people and it's really frankly a wasted investment on the infrastructure side, especially when ISPs sometimes are challenged by adoption and take rates. So inherently, there is an issue around take rates if you're overcharging for largely bad service, right? And so what we're trying to do here is to have the companies commit to a pricing scheme that we think is affordable. We scored that in our projects, in our Gumbo application. And now if you look at the BEAD, 75% of their scoring criteria has to be met by affordability, fair labor, and for lowest CapEx. So we're trying to incorporate what that effectively means from a scoring criteria and a scoring strength. Mm-hmm. So that's really important from an affordability, right? Because it ties into adoption and everything else. And Drew, there was another question. There was a twofer
that I asked already.
Okay, on the affordability piece also. Yeah, we also have clawback mechanisms.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So as a state, the state law says we have the right to claw back an asset if they fail to comply with the grant agreement. We have current legislation that's ongoing today that's going to be heard, I think, in the next week or so to maybe extend the shelf life of this clawback so that we ensure that the prices don't go astronomically out of whack, but they reflect increases based on CPI and anything else. Because that is a fear, right? The price is set at $50 by the provider, and then next year it goes to $300.
Let's be clear what we're talking about here. So these provisions you're talking about, the guarantees that you got from providers to whom Louisiana has granted funds and clawbacks and so forth, are these only on the Louisiana granted funds through the ARPA,
Yes.
Or will these also apply to what you're about to do with BEAD funding when you get your BEAD funding?
It's both.
Okay.
It's both.
And are other states doing this too?
I don't know. That's a good question. It is a good question, right? It's the thing that, and look, I don't know what other states are doing from that perspective, but it's really, when you think about affordability, I think it's pretty well defined what you could do from a low cost affordability perspective. It's a little bit fuzzy when it comes to middle class affordability. Mm-hmm. And so what we would like is feedback from your members and from the ISPs and from the general community writ large on helping us and perhaps other states define what middle class affordability means. Yeah. And what those price points, because I think it's pretty well defined. Low cost, making a requirement for ACP. Naturally, companies are reducing their prices vis-a-vis the speeds to effectively make that for free. But we're still trying to figure out what middle class affordability means. We've somewhat addressed it through our scoring criteria in such that your price point, if you live in a rural community, has to match the lowest price that you would offer in an urban market if you have over 1,000 customers.
Right.
And so we sort of touched on that, but it's something we'd love to get continued feedback on.
And just one additional point of clarification. So when you talk about these assets and the government, whether it's the state government or the federal government, and of course, BEAD is really, the state is the awardee, so it's just in the fund. So it's really the state when you come down to it. So when we talk about that, are the assets of these resources that are being given to providers, are they private resources or are they state resources? There's still some state component to it that allows you to do these kinds of things.
Yeah, look, the commitment that we sign, and it's in the state law, is that during the construction phase, right, during the time in which a company has committed through a legal binding document with the state, they'll typically, what happened like on last November when we signed 77 grant agreements, is our companies said they're going to build to these specific households, to these specific businesses within this specific period of time, whether 6 months, 24 months, or what have you. And so any violation of that, and they also committed to pricing, any violation of that, allows us as a state to claw back the asset or to claw back that money and to find someone else to finish the job.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, I'm sure this is.
Finish,
please.
So the thing is this, every we request on a monthly basis, we have monthly reporting requirements from these companies, and they're going to start to provide, they've provided, or they will start to provide, on a monthly basis, the status of projects, and we'll have that for public review over the next couple of weeks. And so people will start to see how these projects are going. It's like the Domino's tracker, right? Yeah. Pizza's baking, it's being cooked and being delivered. It's going to be the same thing where people can start to see what money has been expensed, how many BSLs have been built, and so on and so forth.
Great. We need the gumbo tracker, right?
Yeah, it'll be the gumbo tracker. There's a lot of fiber in gumbo. There's a lot of fiber in our program.
We have another question. We got a lot of questions here. Let's keep moving through here. So I'd love to hear some voices here talking about lowering latency and buffer bloat. By the way, this is not from David Tate. This is from another questioner, Daniel Dennison. And he's asking about the lower latency and buffer bloat. Once adequate, say 100 by 25 services are delivered instead of pushing throughput up as the only or even an effective way of making communications better. I think the core of the question is, what do you think about lower latency and the importance of getting that, Veneeth?
Look, latency, I think everything's based, the challenges that we have is based on the underlying technology that's driving the transmission speeds and data to the household, right? And so I think what we've historically have seen are things like DSL, perhaps fixed wireless below 100 by 20 and other types of technology pre-pandemic that may have been adequate enough, suddenly is not adequate enough. Now, behaviorally speaking, most, if not all, of the money that we've committed to in this first tranche of gumbo dollars through ARPA has been to behaviorally commit dollars to companies that are building fiber, right? And so it's even the cable companies are upgrading to fiber or DOCSIS, whatever, 4.0, if not beyond. And what we do is we'll send technical people out into the field to actually do the technical audits before we remit a single dollar. And so that's an important exercise for us to really test to see if what is being committed is actually meeting technologically that speed and reliability test, not at 3 a.m., but at peak times and peak usage.
Right. Here's a great question from Steve Wallace. And he's thanking you for the work of ConnectLA in
Washita.
Thank you. You read my mind there. Yeah. From the Broadband Advisory Committee, what is our best approach to get the prospective vendors submitting comprehensive, get-it-done grant requests rather than small piecemeal efforts that stretch out the timeline? Great question. What do you think, Veneeth?
So, the great question, and Steve, you and I have had this conversation before, right? I think what's going to happen over the next couple of months, at least in Louisiana, is we'll likely go through the challenge process that's required and mandated by NTIA. And so our process going forward for BEAD is to run a challenge process and then look at defining project areas based on that challenge process and then run a grant program based on that approach and process. And so, we're going to have to really fine tune and look at these maps. I think in May, the month of May, whether May 1 or May 30th, we'll have the next solid version of the FCC maps come out. We're going to have to look at it and then really understand, let's say in your parish, in Ouachita Parish, which is, for those geographically are not aware of it, which most people will not. Ouachita Parish is northeast Louisiana. It's near the Arkansas Mississippi border, and so it's about 3 hours north of Baton Rouge. And so, we'll have to look at the maps, and as long as we satisfy the 80-20 rule, right, 80% of those locations are unserved, then we'll accordingly define project areas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But what's going to be interesting is in Louisiana, you got a bunch of RDOF. You have 175,692 RDOF locations. That's a lot.
Let's talk a bit about that. That's a useful detour, right? And RDOF, of course, stands for the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund.
Yeah.
This was kind of in between the state broadband role that I referred to 1.0 and now there was a period of time when it was the FCC that was dispensing funds through Connect America Fund and RDOF. There's been a lot of criticism about RDOF, which was a reverse auction approach when internet service providers bid as low as they could to build out particular unserved areas, right? So what is the state of RDOF deployments in Louisiana?
Yeah, so where we are with RDOF is 175,692 locations have a federal commitment, I think 13 providers. So for a couple of things, nearly 80% of those locations are to be, it's going to be a federal obligation through a fiber program, right? So fiber is going to be built to 80% of those locations. The balance is going to be really Starlink, right? Now, Starlink, the state legislature has allowed us to use our BEAD dollars, and I think the BEAD NOFO allows for us to use our dollars to go into areas that already have received a federal obligation, in this case through if it's a satellite's the only exclusive provider. So that, in effect, that unlocks 20,000 locations more that could be funded through the balance of our CPF dollars or the balance, from the infrastructure bill. So second is, with the exception of Starlink, I believe every single RDOF provider in Louisiana, so you have Connexon, you've got Cable South, you've got Charter, you've got CenturyLink, and then you've got a number of others, have already started receiving their monthly checks. And they started receiving their monthly checks, I believe, in Q1 of 2022. So in theory, they should be building, right? And so I know Charter, for instance, is aggressively building their 25,000 RDOF locations in sort of the southeast part of the state. And so, I'll tell you, Drew, whenever we go to a community, 90% of the conversations around RDOF.
Okay.
Not about the programs we manage through Gumbo or the infrastructure, because there's line of sight. They say, okay, Veneeth, I can talk to you. I know the status. And so the Public Service Commission in Louisiana has started requesting quarterly updates on RDOF participants. Because to be brutally honest, okay, if RDOF works, that's great. If RDOF fails, that's not so good. But the sooner companies tell us, hey, those locations are going to be too expensive and we're going to be in default, then that's fine. The sooner they tell us, then we could put it into the BEAD bucket and then satisfy that requirement there.
Well, it sounds like it's something really worth digging into a lot more. Thank you for putting that issue back before us, Veneeth. There's a couple people highlighting and Scott Woods has actually highlighted. We saw the update for East Carroll Parish. Good news, Gumbo. Can you provide any additional information and context regarding your office's role in partnering with East Carroll Parish and supporting the community and the service providers?
Look, the governor has been very consistent that there's no greater place that needs high-speed internet as in Northeast Louisiana. And East Carroll is in Northeast Louisiana. It borders the Mississippi border. It's one of the poorest parishes in the country. And so for folks, there are certain folks sometimes in the telecom world that feel that we don't share a similar passion and interest in helping smaller communities and rural communities and poorer communities as perhaps telecom providers think they do, right? And so we have been very consistent. In fact, I think it was even before I started this job, March 31 of 2021, 2 weeks before that, okay, when I was still working and heading economic development for the mayor of Baton Rouge, I had a conversation with the folks from Delta Interfaith. and they've been consistently addressing, and they've got a singular viewpoint and a vision for addressing the digital divide in East Carroll. And so we, and the governor especially, has prioritized focus on East Carroll. And when I started on March 31st of 2021, he said, we need to absolutely focus on communities like East Carroll. So we've been very consistent. When we launched the Gumbo program in November of 21, the second place we launched it, first officially place, but the second in general, was in East Carroll, in Lake Providence. So we launched the program there. July of last year, the governor went and did an announcement. And look, we went through a challenge process, which was required by state law. And so we were happy to proactively work with all parties to resolve that situation as quickly as possible. It could have been a lot quicker, but we've learned from that. We believe in process improvement, and we're going to change the challenge process going forward. So look, the good thing is I actually had got a call unbeknownst to the fact that we were having this Ask Me Anything today, but I had a call with the Delta Interfaith people thanking us for our efforts and making this as successful as possible. And I said, look, the success is not going to be defined by conversation from our perspective. Success is going to be defined by execution. And so my question to Delta Interfaith today was, when is ConnectLA going to build their first location, right? When is that location going to be built? And he said within 9 months, the entirety of the project will be done. 3 months, the first customer will be connected. I said, let me know when that happens, because I want for me to see is to believe. I'll go up, see, and then happily ever after.
I'm going to put on my calendar, Veneeth, okay? And I'll call you 3 months from today, all right?
Please call me, because that's what I asked Delta Interfaith. I said, all right, 3 months. It's going to be really hot at the time, but it'll be well worth making the trip up to East Carroll and really celebrating with the people when that happens.
Now, a little over a year ago, you gave an interview, and I want to just read a little bit from this because it leads into something I'd really like us to drill into. You said that the role of a broadband director is it's really more than just infrastructure. It's a therapist office. It is hearing from frustrated state residents. It's being a problem solver. It's about tech education, customer support, grant maker, urban planner, business and community matchmaker, geographer, and economic development expert. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit about those. What is the job? What is the job that you and all these other state broadband officers are doing? What is the core thing to be done? And how do you kind of get and access those skills that you need to do that job?
Look, what's interesting is, and I think you and I mentioned this before, Drew, the folks in Silicon Valley who've always who've always somewhat chided government's ability to execute need to take lessons from broadband directors around the country. Why? Because our offices have no more than 3 to 4 people. So in Louisiana, just like many other states, we have 3 people that's going to manage the success of nearly $2 billion in federal funds, including the private match, to affect change to 1.7 million people. I will be hard-pressed to find anyone in Silicon Valley who can do the same thing to affect this many people on finite budgets, okay? Our budget from our office when I started 2 years ago, as I told the commissioner, Jay Darn, who's been incredibly beneficial and helpful to our office, of the Division of Administration, when he said, what do you need? I said, Jay, I need 3 people and $1.5 million in seed capital to get this thing going. Let us prove value. Let us prove worth. And if you feel that we're doing it, then let's move to that next stage. And so what are we inherently doing is we're operating like public startups. We're also spending a significant amount of time on the road through stakeholder engagement, getting customer feedback. What do startups do? They're not making a product. Well, the startups that fail are making a product based on not engaging with customers, but rather what they think customers need. In our case, what are we doing? We're not developing products or services or engagements or programs based on what we think people need, but rather what people need, and then reverse engineer and prescribe policy and action. And so in the course of that, we obtain as much information and we get real-time engagement not only from just people, but people representing different sectors. So I'm a little bit dangerous now in terms of what the challenges that farmers have. I'm a little bit more dangerous in terms of understanding now what the challenges are that librarians have. A little bit more dangerous in terms of what first responders have in terms of their broadband challenge. And summarily, we try to, as much as we can, then develop policy to affect all those communities.
Mm-hmm. The way I used to think about this when I had kind of the role in Illinois of state broadband leader is there's the data and mapping, right? And involving coordination and interaction with other projects and providers. There's the infrastructure piece, which you have you and your colleagues have a much more direct role. Ours was purely indirect, just by virtue of state responsibility with the governor who was the leader in broadband, and the teaching, right, and the education capacity, because there really is that component to it. So of those buckets, let's just talk a minute about data and mapping, okay? And obviously the FCC maps have been roundly discussed on this and many other programs, but like, what is your hope on the mapping front that from the FCC and from what you all at ConnectLA are doing?
So look, when the FCC chairwoman was having conversations with all the state broadband directors late Q3, early part of Q4, one of the things she said was, look, pay attention to the fabric challenges. And I think 19 or so states submitted fabric challenges. We submitted between October 1 and November 15th, we actually submitted 41,000 fabric challenges, of which 16% were net new accepted. A good chunk, I think 60% or 80% were confirmed, and the balance were thrown out. I think we learned from that, and then we issued an additional 36,000 challenges between November 15th and March 15th to the fabric challenges, and we'll see whatever comes out, in the month of May. And so we've been proactive in submitting these fabric challenges on behalf of the 64 parishes. And look, again, the feds are doing this at this scale for the first time ever. For anyone who thinks that a perfect product would have come out, is a little bit unfair, given that, as state broadband offices, we're summarily going through the same issue, right? And so I think for every cut of it, the more intelligence that we have in terms of how decisions are being made in terms of the adjudication of these service locations, then better. The second is this: we have to go through this mandatory challenge process of these FCC maps from a service availability perspective, and that's required by NTIA and that's required by BEAD. And so, over the next couple of months, when we received this past week the model challenge process, every state received the model challenge process.
Whoa. So model challenge process. So that's from NTIA?
Yes.
And can you change it? Can you customize it? What is?
It's a model.
What is your challenge process going to be, Veneeth?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, it's a model, which means we could change, but then we're going to have to get approved for the changes we make to NTIA and get the NTIA's blessing on that. But it's a 36-page document which we received Wednesday, so we're going through every page and every word to understand, mechanically speaking, what is being proposed and the process flow for the challenge process, so that if we think specific to Louisiana, we need to make changes, then we'll quickly, flag NTI and say, hey, this is what we think should be the model challenge. So we're actively going through that now.
Let's make sure we talk about other providers or providers themselves and their role. And we got a question from Daniel Denson. Let's ask this and ask about how you interact with providers. Daniel asks, have you found, as I hope, that some large providers simply do not build out until government money becomes available, i.e. Spectrum, Time Warner, Cox, and the like? Okay, so what's your reaction to that statement / question?
Look, I don't work for those companies. So it's hard for me to behaviorally comment on specific individual company actions, right? Now, all I can go for is if we're trying to solve an unsolved problem and one of these companies says we have the best solution and we run the trap. So we actually have an internal audit team that looks at the financials, to look at the strength, to look at track record and history, et cetera. then, based on a competitive scoring process, we'll commit to those dollars. We'll commit those dollars to those projects. Now, the commitment means we're not giving them all the money up front. The moment they deliver on 10% of the broadband serviceable locations, and the fact that within a 15 or 10-day period, 10 business day, that serviceable location could be active, is our litmus test to remit payment. So we send technical auditors and we say, yes, and yes, within 10 days, that household can get high-speed internet. And then they get 10% of the money, and then 35, 65, 85, 100%, right? So look, at the end of the day, I have to deal like the 55 other states and territories in actuality. I have to learn from the past and behaviorally create policies to reflect real time and then future programs, right? And so at this point, everyone's on the same level playing field. Everyone's on a clean slate. We give money based on a company's ability to execute, and then we'll track that on a monthly basis. And if companies don't execute, then there are pretty significant penalties that we'll exert on those companies.
What I mean is your gut that most or majority of funding will go to large incumbents, to co-ops, to small providers?
Yeah.
Where do you think it's going to end up being distributed?
Actually, a majority of our dollars of the money that we've committed thus far, I believe, I'm pretty sure, but I got to check whether it's 50, 55, 60%, did not go to the Charters, Comcast, AT&Ts of the world.
Wow.
It went to companies like America Office Products that's building in Lake Charles. It's going to a company called Cajun Broadband that's building in Southwest Louisiana. It's going to companies like Cable South, which is based out of Louisiana, that's building throughout the state. It's going to companies like Skyrider, which is a hometown company out of Monroe that's building out in Caldwell Parish. So a majority of our dollars did not go to the larger businesses.
A great data point, and one well worth following up for other states. Austin LaHoy builds on that, asking another question: what role do small operators play in bridging the digital divide? And asks specifically, should state broadband offices be making space for small operators in their programs, or should we only care about getting the infrastructure built and getting people online?
It is important for us in Louisiana that we encourage all providers to participate in this program. And all providers have an equal shot of getting this money. And if you look at behaviorally, the dollars that have been received in this first good chunk of our CPF dollars, it went to smaller companies that are closer to the heart of the communities. Mm-hmm. And so did we purposely create a categorization of, hey, you're a small company, we'll give you bonus points? No. We felt really confident, and we ran the traps to ensure that these companies like Cajun Broadband, who, by the way, has already constructed and built a network 6 months faster than the commitment they made to us through the grant agreement, and it's all underground infrastructure, by the way, in this one particular parish, those companies have a sometimes quicker and faster way to execute because they're not dealing with perhaps the larger challenges in dealing with larger organizations, frankly. And so being a smaller company, just like being why could broadband offices around the country move so fast? Because we're not dealing with millions of other issues that we have to deal with at the same time, right?
Right.
So that nimbleness is always good.
Maybe compare the speed of the ConnectLA broadband office to the FCC's mapping division, right?
Happy to always help them as well.
We have a question from Nikki Amadi. I hope, again, I've got that right. Looking to the future, what role do you see BEAD playing in shaping the digital economy and promoting economic growth in Louisiana? And how do you kind of want to make sure that you get as much funds as possible through BEAD? So
great question. Okay. I'm oversimplifying it, but the two biggest ways that you can grow an economy is increase the workforce of your economy and or increasing worker productivity on a per employee and per output basis. And if you think about all of this broadband dollars, there's probably no greater infrastructure play in our lifetime that's going to affect directly both challenges. If you think about all the jobs that are going to be created in the construction, maintenance of these networks. If you then think about the impact that from a worker productivity, by having broadband, you're now improving healthcare outcomes, which is going to improve worker productivity. for a farmer, you're going to help reduce operating expenses. You're going to start to see that multiplier occur very quickly. I think on average, in a place like Louisiana, every small business that gets access to high-speed internet, it's going to probably increase sales, increase revenue by on average $45,000 to $55,000, per year, and that means potentially adding one more employee. And so I just think we are being really intentional and focused on solving the functional need of getting everyone access to internet, but then how do we leverage broadband as a platform or as an asset or as an enabler to drive Louisiana's economy? And so we're talking to folks in the healthcare sector. We're talking to folks in the entrepreneurial sector. We're talking to folks in the academic centers. We're talking to the folks where broadband can be converged with telehealth, mental telehealth, right? And efficacy to help drive and improve mental health awareness. So, we're going to have the digital equity plan that every state has committed to. We're going to actually have our digital equity plan available for public comment. I believe May 8th. So
oh my gosh, in 9 days, 10 days.
Correct. So, and that's going to be an awesome opportunity for folks to look at the covered populations that we've talked to and prescribe ways to say, hey, if this covered population has an issue around healthcare, what are those business models? What are those innovative, disruptive opportunities that we could help obviate the primary care need through innovation, technology, broadband, et cetera, that we could partner with, fund maybe through our infrastructure bill or through the digital equity funds?
Well, this goes to the point we started with about kind of moving fast and going forward. Jace Wilson asks, you've mentioned in the past your goal to be the first state to roll out BEAD. How will you make it happen? What steps have you taken to prepare Louisiana for this? So
really, we have 3 deliverables. Every state's going to have 3 deliverables that they have to submit to the feds. And so our 5-year action plan is actually due May 30th. So that'll be available for the public to see after May 30th. So that's around the corner, and you'll have a sense of how we're framing some of the issues and how we're going to address it. The second is the initial proposal, right? The initial proposal, we're chunking it up into effectively 2 volumes. And so we'll have both those volumes available for public comment, or we're targeting the July 15th, if not sooner period, for folks to look at our initial proposal and have that for a public comment. We incorporate that feedback and then submit it to the feds. We have a great working relationship with NTIA. They've been working pretty laboriously. We ask a lot of questions all the time. I often ask the same questions over and over again. And so they've been great to work with. And so they've been working at the same level of speed and urgency that we are in helping us address some of these questions and answers. So
what's the third deliverable?
Yeah, and the third deliverable is the digital equity plan, and that'll be out for public review May 8th.
And the digital equity plan will kind of just like what that does versus what the May 30th 5-year plan does.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of crosswalk, right? There's a lot of things that we're going to take in the digital equity plan, and you'll see that in the 5-year plan. You're going to see there are elements of the digital equity plan, like questions 2 and 4 in the initial proposal speaks directly to tribal coordination, tribal and stakeholder efforts and in coordination and to certify that coordination, right? And so we have done, like I have visited, again, our office has visited 88 towns, cities, villages. We've had 125 different broadband meetings prior to formally starting our digital equity efforts. Through the digital equity efforts, we've had 29 focus group conversations with a variety of different covered populations, from veterans to disabled folks, to folks where English is not the primary language, in different populations, folks that are formerly incarcerated. We've had 7 regional meetings, and we've conducted a survey where we've had over 700 responses. So the amount of data, both qualitative and quantitative, is substantial, which is frankly a high-class problem to have. And now the bigger challenge is now sifting through it and really focusing on the most important pieces that'll help answer and stitch that story for Louisiana to NTIA.
We have a question from Benjamin Kahn. He raises the issue of Hurricane Ida.
Yeah.
2021. Obviously, Hurricane Katrina is still very much in our popular consciousness about the impact of natural disasters. What strategies are you employing to ensure that broadband infrastructure is resilient enough to?
Great question. Great question. So Ben, the issues around, look, we're approaching hurricane season in Louisiana, June 1. The hurricane season is June 1 to November. What's scary is, if you remember back in the, at least from our perspective, back in when we were in elementary, the teachers would often give us a little map and they'd give us push pins, and you would track the hurricane from the Western Sahara, and it takes 3, 4, 5, 6 days before it crosses the Atlantic Ocean and it goes through the Caribbean and up. The challenge with hurricanes today is they're not getting any weaker as they approach landfall. In fact, Hurricane Ida spooled up in the Caribbean and then quickly made its way up to Louisiana. And it did not lose substantial strength as it made its way up to North Louisiana. And in fact, it caused more death in the mid-Atlantic, right? Because it cut it through the Northeast than in Louisiana. And so in New Orleans, the levees held up, right? And that's part of the Katrina funds. But what Hurricane Ida did was that it caused far more damage to the telecom infrastructure than Katrina did. And so as a result, the FCC chairwoman and Commissioner Brendan Carr quickly came to Louisiana when Ida happened. And I think the president issued an executive order, or the FCC issued an order, with President Biden to ensure that that mandatory now is required among network providers. I think before it wasn't, but now it's mandatory. But when it comes to our efforts with regards to broadband, we feel if we're smart with the money, if we decide to do this, we're still in the sandbox phase. We feel that we could be, if we're judicious with our money, we feel that we can have enough money to, if we wanted to build a lot of the infrastructure underground below Interstate 10, especially the community anchor institutions. But we've partnered with a state agency called the Coastal Protection Restoration Authority, which is helping us with flood modeling risk, especially in the community anchor institutions south of Interstate 10, which are most exposed to hurricanes, to help us understand flood modeling risk, and over the next 5, 10, 15 years, where they think it would make sense to build this infrastructure underground versus above ground, not only is south of I-10, but also north of I-10. And so they've helped us answer some of those questions, and where we think it's needed, maybe we'll award points for projects that are built underground to create resilience.
We have kind of a two-part from Ebony Cooksley. One is about sort of the supply chain, and we chatted a little bit about this earlier, but let's come back to it. The question is, what recent steps has ConnectLA taken to address supply chain and workforce shortage concerns? And then here's another one we haven't talked about, which is with regard to digital navigators and assisting covered populations with digital skill enhancement. What are your thoughts about incentivizing paying existing teachers to serve as digital navigators in local anchor institutions? Interesting idea. What do you think of that?
I think it is hard to solve the digital equity issue with just the three of us in our office. So it is important that we rely on community foundations, and we rely on organizations like ARP and the Urban League of Louisiana, which does phenomenal work to help us address it. Now, it's interesting on the, digital equity. The folks at East Carroll Parish through the Delta Interfaith, they do a phenomenal job because they have people on the ground. Not every parish has someone on the ground that's focused on digital equity. So the idea of incentivizing or paying a teacher to do that is a complex. It's a interesting idea, but it's probably very complex to execute. Especially we're in the middle of a legislative session in which the governor is trying to work on doing teacher pay raises, among other things. And so then who else in the community could you incentivize? So we work with the Board of Regents, which governs all the universities and colleges in Louisiana, to give $25,000 grants, which is it's a great start, to 5 parishes, 5 librarians. So East Carroll being one of them, Rapides Parish, which is in the middle, West Feliciana, Jefferson Parish, and Livingston Parish, to help fund the cost of a digital navigator. And that's what they did, right? And so it's an interesting time to go back to the Board of Regents, see how those programs have worked. and then see which ones could be scalable. And if that's something we could work with them to help partner and fund the librarian to be the digital navigator since they're on the ground, and that could be a way to do that.
Janine Suki asks, are there any government-owned networks being funded by these dollars? And that raises a question, right, of course, because I believe Louisiana has had controversies over this, but there are local municipal-owned networks in Louisiana.
Yeah, so there are two actually in Louisiana. Lafayette Utility System, right, which owns LUS Fiber. We have committed money to LUS, by the way. And so they are a muni-owned infrastructure player, and so we've committed money, and they're building in a number of locations that we've awarded them. The other is in the town of Ruston, which is in North Louisiana. In the town of Ruston now, their model is a little bit different because it's actually not business to consumer, but it's business to business. But from what I understand, they're in the process of selling and divesting their infrastructure for a variety of different reasons, right? And so you've got those two very discrete examples, one selling, one we've committed dollars to, but you have parishes that have looked at investing some of their ARPA dollars or the remaining of their ARPA dollars to build open access networks in the parish of Tangipahoa, which is about an hour east of Baton Rouge along I-12, just north of New Orleans. The parish president there is committed to using ARPA dollars to build their open access network. So, we do have, let me take this, we do have the the Fair Market Act. And in technically, if a company or if a municipality wants to build their own network, they can, right? But they have got to go through a sequence of steps to be able to do that. I think what parishes are doing is they're seeing that, look, we've got other priorities like water and sewer that are especially important in Louisiana that we want to dedicate some of our funds to. And so let's prioritize that and then lean on, Veneeth and team and the governor and legislature to help us with the broadband side of things.
Right. Well, there's my penultimate question, Veneeth. Can you just talk a little about the primary challenges your office has encountered and how you're addressing them? And in particular, what systems have you put in place to ensure kind of compliance objectives? So what's your thought on those?
Look, I think the primary challenges, Drew, and if I'm not answering the question, it's because this is the primary challenge. The primary challenge is the fluidity and speed of information that we're receiving from the feds on a daily basis, weekly basis, and what we're hearing and feeling and seeing at the ground level. So what you're seeing is at the ground level, there are people like Steve Wallace, who does a great job in Washita Parish in their broadband committee, and others who are saying, Veneeth, these are the challenges. Let's work quickly. You're seeing the fluidity and information being driven by NTIA and the Fed saying, all right, these are the priority areas from our perspective. And the idea is in a three-man office, it's making sure that you are reflective and appreciative of all the challenges and information we're hearing from the top, all the stuff we're hearing from the bottom, and quickly execute, right? And as part of that, the functional, so those are the daily challenges that we have. The functional challenges around workforce and permitting, we've got to, again, we are very blessed in Louisiana that we've got an incredible group of partners who are unabashed with sharing their challenges, but not just stopping at sharing their challenges, but are working with us at any time of day to help us solve that problem. And so, when we had Angela Ty Bennett with us last Friday, who runs the Digital Equity Program, the fact that within a very shortened period, we were able to convene a meeting with the CEO of the Urban League of Louisiana, CEO of ARP, the leader of broadband workforce programs at the Louisiana Community College Technical System, two federal representatives from two federally recognized tribes in Louisiana. When we had representatives from Dillard University, Xavier, two historic HBCUs, community foundations come very quickly to say, all right, what do we need to get going? That gives us sort of the guiding light in terms of trying to address these challenges. Mm-hmm. So yes, we do have challenges, right? But we feel really good with the partners that we have across the state to help us solve them.
So Veneeth, thank you for spending this hour with us. You're in some ways, you're kind of local Baton Rouge. A boy makes good, right? You're a attendee of Baton Rouge High School. You've worked, gone to Purdue and Johns Hopkins to get a master's of science and finance. And I see you everywhere. You've been like on so many boards. And what I want to ask you, Veneeth, is who came up with the name gumbo?
Yeah, so obviously we like our food, right? So, gumbo, was a germination from the state representative who helped draft the gumbo bill, right? So he lives in Avoyelles, and he likes gumbo. We all like gumbo, and he came up with an acronym. But what's interesting is we actually also have an acronym for our digital equity plan.
Okay.
And so we'll share that very soon. But it's another.
Oh, wait! You're not going to share it now, Veneeth?
No, I'm not going to share it now, Drew, because
I am so hungry. I am so hungry.
But let's just say this: it was a little bit more complex to get every individual letter having meaning in this new program. But I need to get clearance from the people at the top. But yes, it'll be hopefully it's going to be an equivalent food, just as tasty, just as buttery and rich as other Louisiana foods, and that'll be forthcoming.
Well, Veneeth, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for spending this time with us. We'll be in touch, and we'll see you soon. Don't forget to tune in to our next Ask Me Anything. At least right now, we may add another one, but we have Jim Strichinger from South Carolina coming up on May 19th. Veneeth, thank you again.
Have a great weekend, and we'll see you soon. Actually, we'll see you in a few weeks, Drew, in New Orleans. Yeah,
I'll be there.
We'll teach you to some gumbo and give you we're going to actually, we'll grab lunch or dinner, and what you eat, you'll realize is going to be the name of our digital equity program. And we'll share that with you in a few weeks.
Wonderful. Take care, and take care, everybody, being with us.
Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye. We're good, Drew?
Yes, we're good. Thank you.